Okay, well, a good evening from me here in Australia, and I guess a good morning to everyone in the States, good afternoon to everyone in Europe, and I guess good whatever it is to everyone else in between. Welcome to the Atheist Pastor Podcast. Yeah, we've got a good show tonight. Got an interesting guest. I've got Henry Rambow with me. Now, Henry, he has a background as he's a former Christian missionary who spent some time in China, and I'd like to say has now seen the light, but I don't know how that would be interpreted by the religious folks who watch. But Henry, welcome to the podcast, mate. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, I guess to run into it and to have a bit of an idea on your background. Let us know, I guess, the brief overview. We'll get into a lot of things, but who are you and why are we talking?
Well, as you mentioned, I'm a former evangelical missionary. I spent, I would say, about a total of 15 years in the evangelical church, and some of that time in China. My goal was just to save people from hell, to convince people that Jesus Christ was the Son of God and they needed to believe in him in order to avoid hell and go to heaven. And I guess why we're talking is I eventually stopped believing, and my deconversion happened over a period of years. It was a painful experience. And then at the end of it, I ended up writing my story in a book called Confessions of a Rogue Missionary. So now here I am telling people, instead of the good news is that you deserve to go to hell and Jesus Christ paid the price to save you from that. Now my message is the good news is there is in fact no hell. And you have the freedom to create your own purpose in life.
Excellent. So I guess as far as your introduction to the church, were you born into the church? Were you raised in the church, or was it something you found later in life? Or
so I was born into the church. My mother was the daughter of a Methodist minister who was the son of a Methodist minister, and we were Methodists, which is at least where we were in the church that we went to, a pretty moderate religion, moderate denomination. And it wasn't until I turned about 17 or 18, when I had that sort of young man's drive to find a deeper purpose in life and to do something significant with my life, that I started asking the big questions. And in fact, looking back, I would say that before that, I was really an agnostic who went to church because my family went to church. And then around the age
one of the famous pew warmers, as they call them.
Exactly. Yeah. I was an active member of the church. I played music in church and everything. But in fact, and I was a confirmed Christian. I had gone through the official confirmation process at the age of 13. And I specifically remember when I was kneeling before the pastor and he was having me recite these words, confirming my faith, saying, "Do you believe this?" And I was to respond, "Yes, I believe this." In my mind, I was thinking, I actually, for the first time at age 13, I'm thinking about these things that I've been told all my life. And I'm like, I don't know if they're true. I don't know if I believe it. And I don't know if I should be kneeling in front of this congregation, affirming my faith in these things that I don't believe. And at that moment, I kind of imagined like, okay, well, what would happen if I said, actually, I don't know, and kind of stood up and walked out? That, what kind of horror show that would be.
Well, especially at 13 and being I guess third generation in the ministers.
Exactly.
So, I guess at what point did you see the light of Christianity, so to speak, and I guess really get deep and involved? I guess you've started your journey. You're sort of looking into it at 13. Was it a fast process, or was it something that sort of gradually happened?
I guess it was kind of gradual. I had other friends who were born again Christians, and they kept telling me about their experience. And whenever I heard that, I was curious, and I thought that sounds amazing, to have a powerful spiritual experience and to believe something so strongly that these people believe. And so I was always kind of curious about that. And then it wasn't until probably age 17 or 18 when I finally thought, well, this actually is the most important question there is, because if there is a God, that is the most important thing to know. And if there is a heaven and a hell, and if the things that you do in this life and the things that you believe determine who goes there and who doesn't, then there really is nothing more important than that, right? And I still believe that if that were true, I absolutely would want to be doing the right thing, believing the right things. And so because of that,
you wouldn't want to upset him, especially after having read the Old Testament. I mean, you don't want to upset the guy if he's there, do you? He's all into smiting and nastiness. So
exactly. So I sat down and I read the Bible for myself. I had one of those red letter editions where everything that Jesus said was in red. And I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to read Jesus's own words and come to a conclusion for myself. And I sat down and I did that. And I remember kind of feeling blown away because I had never really considered them for myself. And I started with the Sermon on the Mount, which had some really beautiful things in it, some beautiful sentiments. And I read it and I did feel, that it was beautiful, and much of it in there resonated with me. And I called one of my born again Christian friends and told him about that experience. And he offered to pray for me over the phone. And we prayed together, and I had one of those sort of born again experiences where I just felt flooded with joy at the knowledge that, there was this God, an all-powerful God, who loved me and cared about me. And it was an extremely powerful emotional experience that sort of stayed with me for a long time. And even when many aspects of my faith were falling apart later on, when I was examining things and studying and just looking at the world and trying to make things line up, in the end, I was kind of looking back on that experience and thinking, that's kind of what's still holding me together. I had that experience. How could that not be real?
And see, I guess that it is an interesting experience, because I experienced the same thing myself, with and throughout my religious walk as well, all those feelings, the flood of emotions, the hearing from God, the feeling something when people are praying for you or you're praying for them. How have you, I guess, and we might be jumping a little bit ahead, but I guess it's always interesting to see how do you reconcile that now? I guess spoiler alert, he's no longer a Christian, but.
Yeah. I came to realize that people in all religions and all faiths have powerful emotional experiences like that. I've had Muslim friends tell me that they've had just as powerful an experience that is just as strong a proof to them that their God is real. And I've had Mormon friends tell me that. And then I've had friends who are completely non-religious who tell me about similar experiences, maybe in a moment of meditation. Some people who've done certain kinds of drugs and tell me that they have the same kind of experience. And so basically it boils down to this powerful emotional experience is something that's common to humanity. It's something that our human minds are capable of experiencing in pretty much any context and in any framework of beliefs. And so because of that, it cannot serve as confirmation of one religion over another when people from different religions have the same experience.
Yeah. So I guess looking at, obviously you've at some point become a missionary. What happens in between, I guess, you saying, I give my life to Jesus, and making that decision to, I guess, begin your missionary work?
Yeah. So, again, that moment when I thought, I'm going to have to determine whether this is real, and if God is real, and if heaven and hell are real, then I have to be all in. Like, there's no other choice, because if that's it, that is the most important thing. And so once I was all in, I was finding Bible studies and finding a church and just surrounding myself with Bible teaching and Christian fellowship. And in college, I got involved in Campus Crusade for Christ, and went to Bible studies with them and large group fellowship meetings. And, they provided opportunities to go on mission trips. I went on mission trips to Mexico, and they actually took me on my first mission trip, which we called a vision trip to China. And that was my first time going to China. Was when I was in college. We went there just for a week, and we called it, we didn't call it that, but other people sort of belittlingly called it gospel bombing missions. And the whole thing was we just fly in, we go to university campus, everything's top secret. We don't tell them why we're there. They think that we're just there to meet other Americans, and that it's sort of like a cultural exchange trip, which is, kind of is. And we would break up into groups and go out and talk to kids on college campuses and just try to share the gospel with them and tell them, there's a hell, you deserve to go there, but good news is God has a plan for your life and Jesus died for you. And if you believe in that, then you're going to go to heaven, and you pray this prayer and you will be saved. And, I did that on campuses in Mexico, and I did that on campuses in China, and, generally would get someone to that prayer and think, all right, I saved them, and then, would never have contact with them again.
Yeah, that the lack of follow up, I guess. So obviously you go to somewhere like Mexico, and Mexico's got a background with Christianity. I guess it's not an uncommon thing there. Probably more Catholic than, I guess, Protestant.
Yeah, I think they're 90-something% Catholic.
Yeah. When you go to somewhere like China that doesn't have a Christian background, how do you find people, I guess, who may not have actually heard of or be familiar with the tenets of Christianity? How do those conversations generally go?
Most of the time when I talk to people, they've heard of it and they just regard it as a myth. This is a myth from Western culture, in exactly the same way that we would regard, Greek mythology as an obvious myth. And so it's kind of funny that, hey, look, here's someone who actually believes this Western myth that we've heard about. But Christianity has become common enough there. And, the churches have kind of come back since the Cultural Revolution in the 60s and 70s that, most people, even in communist China, most people know someone who goes to church. They know other Chinese people who've gone to church.
So obviously, and I remember from my time within the church, and I guess you're probably the best person to talk about how true this is, there was always a big narrative that there was a lot of persecution of Christians in China, and obviously being a communist nation, religion is frowned upon in general. How did you find, I guess, did you have any interaction with, I guess, government agencies, or was there any pushback from officials in China?
Yeah, that was always a really interesting question. So back in the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s and 70s, there was tremendous persecution against Christians, and they were jailed for their beliefs. And some of them were in work camps for 20 years or more, and then came out and went back into the ministry. And among the evangelical Christian community, that I was a part of, we sort of insisted on believing that was still the case. And it really wasn't. When I was there, I went to churches that were open churches. It was not underground. There was nothing secret. And they were preaching the gospel, the same message that was taught in the churches that I considered to be doctrinally solid here in the States. And they had complete copies of the Bible that anyone could walk in and buy. And there were myths among my group in Campus Crusade for Christ saying, oh, you can't get a complete Bible there. For example, I think they said the book of Romans and the book of Revelation are never included in the Bible there. They're illegal.
Yeah, I remember hearing something like that.
Every pastor there has to run their sermon by a communist official before they're allowed to preach it. And none of that was true. I actually spent a fair amount of time, because once I was there, and I went around to lots of different churches, and I talked to people who were in some of the open churches, and some people who were in the underground churches, and it's kind of exciting to go over there thinking of yourself as sort of this underground spy, and everything has to be done secretly. And so there was actually an element of disappointment when it was like, oh, it's actually not like that. You can be totally open here. I talked to the pastors, I interviewed people, and actually one of my projects became to sort of bring back an accurate picture to the States and to the evangelical church here in America to say, hey, look, praise God, the situation isn't as awful as we've been picturing it to be. And I actually found a lot of resistance to that message here because people wanted to believe that there was a lot of persecution over there, and that was kind of a big fundraising thing too.
I remember raising money to smuggle Bibles into China back in the day, and we had, it was probably every 6 months or so that we'd have a fundraiser for, let's get the Bibles into China, because they're not allowed to be Christians there. So that's actually really interesting. So when you went back with that narrative to the churches, was it something that they accepted, or were you sort of given a bit of a shh, don't tell anyone?
Nobody explicitly said shh, don't tell anyone, but they just weren't interested in it. The belief that there's a huge amount of persecution, and there is some persecution. So I don't want to make it sound like it's totally open, totally free. And it's also partly a regional thing. There's some regional officials who, they enjoy cracking down on churches and stuff, and others who don't. So it kind of depends on where you are. But they just weren't interested in the message, because the message that there's a lot of persecution and that you have to go in secret and smuggle Bibles and everything, that's just it's a much more exciting message. That's much more fun to believe, I think.
It's a sexier message, I guess.
It is, yeah. I mean, one of the chapters in my book is called "Spies for Christ," and that was exciting. Like the first time that I went over there, they got us together, preparing us for the trip, and they said, "Look, we're not going to be allowed to talk about Christianity. So when we go over there, we're going to have to use these code words. We're not going to be allowed to say the word Bible. We're not going to be allowed to say the word Christian." And so we got together, we had this meeting, we covered our Bibles with brown paper, which seems silly to me, because it's like, okay, if you walk in with a covered book, surely that's going to be more suspicious than an uncovered one. Although it turns out that that's kind of just everybody in China covers all their books anyway. So it actually kind of did make sense. But, on the plane ride there, when we landed in China, one of the people in our group, it had been a long, like 14-hour flight or something, just was very excited about having finally landed, and just sort of exclaimed, "Oh, praise the Lord." And then suddenly she was like, covered her mouth and was looking around thinking, "Oh my God, I said, praise the Lord." It's like, is there a SWAT
getting ready
team
for the communist officials to swoop in? Yeah,
exactly. But here's what I found. If you go over there and you tell the people going to an open Chinese church, they're like, "Hey, you don't have religious freedom," they'd be like, well, I'm going to church, I'm having Bible study, so I feel pretty free. However, they will admit, like, if you criticize the government, then you will get in trouble. And if you're preaching a message that is anti-government, and that says, because of our Christianity, we have to oppose the Communist Party, then you will get in trouble. And so basically my takeaway was, there is a lot of freedom of expression and freedom of religion there, as long as you don't criticize the government. That is like the one thing that you cannot do.
Now, I do have a question that's come from the chat. Now, anyone who is in the chat, if you do have any questions, feel free. So this is what happens when it's 9:45 at night for me. Feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll ask them, assuming they're appropriate. Godless Granny has asked, "Did you feel rejected by Campus Crusade at one point?" She mentioned that she did.
Rejected by Campus Crusade in the sense, like while I was a member of it, or later on?
I think that's what she's saying. While you're a member.
Rejected, not really. I would say, for me, Campus Crusade, like that was my social network, and those were my closest friends, and that was kind of where I found a sense of belonging in college. And I kind of, part of it is because I kind of fell into line with everything that they taught and everything they believed. I didn't really question it or anything. And I guess I know some people who had some doctrinal differences, and they ended up feeling rejected by that. Yeah, I had one friend who was a member of a church that Campus Crusade did not consider to be to have orthodox views, and he ended up leaving Campus Crusade sort of with a little bit of bitterness.
Yeah. Now there was also the question about where can people buy your book, but then it has actually just been linked in the chat. So anyone who does want to buy the book, it is there, and yeah, all good to go. Ricardo's asked, did I mean to send the message on Twitter? I'm actually not too sure what you mean by that, Ricardo, but I did mean to tag you, I guess, unless I've sent something else on Twitter and haven't realised, which is a possibility. Mama Atheist has asked, do you regret trying to convert people in China to Christianity?
Yeah, that's kind of one of the things. What I regret most about the type of missions work that I did was that it was purely evangelical. It was purely aimed at changing what people believed and saying, you need to believe this. I still have deep respect for missions work that's based on humanitarian aid and actually providing for people's very real physical needs, providing food and providing clean water and things like that. And when I look back on what I was doing, I kind of feel like this pure evangelical work, how Christian was that really? Because the Jesus of the Bible that I loved was all about helping people and healing people and providing for their needs. And so I do kind of regret that I was focused entirely on changing people's beliefs. However, I'm not bitter about the years that I spent in the church, and I'm not angry about it. And I'm very grateful for a lot of the experiences that I had and a lot of the skills that I gained while I was in the church, and it shaped me into who I am now. So I did go through, after my deconversion, I did go through a period of depression and a period of sort of feeling a loss and no sense of direction. And that was several years, and it took me a while to get through that. And so I did have some anger at that point, but I have now arrived at a point where I'm very sympathetic toward Christianity. And there are many things about it that I love, and I'm grateful for having gotten from that experience.
Now, Pastor Mike's thrown a good question out there, but I'm actually going to hold that question off because I think that's going to get to something that we'll talk to after. Brian Gervais, good old Art Against Ignorance, really, really top. If you know anyone who is an atheist and a musician, they need to get in touch with Brian. He wanted to know, are they predominantly Buddhist where you were in China?
That's an interesting question. A really difficult question to answer, I found, is what is Buddhism? Because you'll get, you talk to 10 different people, you'll get 10 different answers. And I've known Buddhists who say that Buddhism does not entail belief in any gods. And I've known other Buddhists who say, no, Buddhism entails belief in many gods, and here's a temple, and here are some sculptures of these gods. Now, when I was in China, I visited many Buddhist temples. And I saw many Buddhist monks, and it kind of how there's cultural Christianity here in the U.S. where people call themselves Christian, they grow up Christian, maybe they celebrate Christmas and Easter, but they don't really have any particular deep belief in it. There's a lot of that, and so you'll find a lot of people with sculptures of Buddhist gods in their houses, and maybe sometimes they'll go to a Buddhist temple and burn incense and pray. So that, yeah, I would say there was a lot, but it spanned the full range of all the different kinds of Buddhism that are conceivable.
So how many times would you have gone to China, and was it always just the quick in and outs, or was there extended time you spent there as well?
So after college, so first it was just the quick in and out, and then after college, in fact, because of that very first vision trip, and because of how much I loved just the hospitality of the Chinese people on that trip, and because I had lots of other friends who were very devoted to bringing the gospel to China, I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to go back to China. And so I actually spent a whole year after that studying the Chinese language and planning on going back, and spending a lot of time thinking, do I want to go back with Campus Crusade for Christ on one of their 1 or 2 year long trips or something else? And I ended up going with an organization that at the time was called Educational Services International. And what I liked about them was they were completely above board about being Christian, and they said, we just provide Christian teachers who will teach English, because there's a huge demand for native English speakers over there to teach English. And I loved that it wasn't, so secretive, because I always felt a little weird about lying about the purpose for going there. And so we just went there, and, everyone knew we were Christian, and we went to the above ground churches there, and we were free to invite people to go with us and all that. And I ended up staying in China for 5 years, although for the first year I was with the missions organization. And then after that, I kind of considered myself to be an independent missionary. I kind of modeled myself after the Apostle Paul, the tent maker.
Yes.
I got myself a job as an editor, and continued teaching some English, and then eventually went into teaching math and physics as well. But that was my goal, was just to be a Christian, living a Christian life, being that light on the hill, just attracting people to the love of Christ.
No, too easy. So I guess your time over there. Now I've read bits and pieces of your book, and I know that there's certainly some interesting stories from China. Would you like to, I guess, maybe just give us one of the more interesting stories about your time there?
Oh, I'm going to pick the wrong one. I didn't think about this ahead of time. There were so many. Oh, well, do I pick one? I mean, it was astonishing to me how rare it was for a lot of people over there to see a foreigner, to see a Westerner with a white face and a big nose. And a lot of them, they call us big noses. That's one of the terms for us over there. And shortly after I got over there, I went to this garden, and there was an old man who had to be 90 years old or something. And he walked up to me and he asked me how old I was. And at the time I was 23, and I told him. And then he just reached out and he started feeling my nose. And, and I realized I am so alien to some of these people. Like they've seen people like me on TV, but never seen people like me in real life. So that was kind of one of my first experiences over there.
And were you based in the cities, or were you based in countryside, or did you travel? I mean, where were you generally?
I was generally in Beijing. I stayed in Beijing most of the time. I did do some traveling around, but that was pretty much what I called home for 5 years.
Okay. So I guess your time as a missionary ends, and you head back to the States. What's your Christian journey at this point?
Yeah, so I would say, I started losing my faith actually while I was still in China. So, and it was a very gradual process. It was just starting to not be as confident in the things that I believed. And it was irritating me. I became much more irritable, largely because of that. And I came back to the States and continued going to an evangelical church here. And basically from that point on, for the next few years, it was like trying to make a bad marriage work when you know it's going to fall apart and it's not going to work. And I just kept trying, going to church, praying hard, reading the Bible, and hoping that the Holy Spirit would sort of overcome these doubts that were within me. But at the same time, I very highly value truth and reason. And I also believed that God, as the creator of truth and reason, also valued truth and reason. And that if God values truth and reason, that he would absolutely encourage us to pursue truth and reason. And I'd always had an interest in science. I had actually been a physics major in college, and that created some cognitive dissonance there, always from the beginning, trying to make my understanding of science and Christianity mesh together.
And were you a young Earth creationist or old Earth, or?
I kind of went back and forth. I kind of ended up thinking for a while, if God's all powerful, he could have made it work any way he wanted. So he could have created it, and a lot of it was just sort of just trying to find something that I could believe, that I wouldn't feel too ridiculous believing, but believing that it's possible God created the world 5,000 years ago with age, which kind of sounds a little ridiculous to me now.
No, I remember having that same thought actually. It was all created with a history.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and that leads me, I guess, to, and we may have already covered it, but Pastor Mike's question from earlier, which was when you still identified as a Christian, was there a time you knew you were an atheist, but still tried to find reason to believe in a God?
Yeah, and that time lasted several years, and it was kind of an up and down thing where I would convince myself for a while, like, okay, I think I've managed to find peace with some of these doubts, and I think I'm still a Christian and I'm still fully committed. But then they would come back, and I did a lot of reading, and I was like, I want to be completely open-minded, and read some atheist perspectives and read science, as written by the actual scientists. And here's one of the big things. For most of my time as an evangelical Christian, I got all of my knowledge about any of the arguments against Christianity filtered through Christian apologists. So I received my information about evolution and a lot of the philosophical and moral arguments against Christianity filtered through Christian apologists. So, people like Josh McDowell, Lee Strobel, some of the famous people who wrote apologetics books. And in the end, I realized that was kind of inherently dishonest. And if I really wanted to pursue knowledge, I needed to go to the source and make sure I wasn't just getting a pre-digested version that, some Christian authority figure has already digested this information about evolution and about, philosophical arguments about God, and then given them to me along with the arguments for why we can reject those things. And I found when I started reading stuff that was written by actual evolutionary biologists, then all of the arguments that I thought I had against evolution just fell apart. I was like, oh my gosh, these actual evolutionary biologists, they make the Sunday school teachers who say, look, something with half-formed wings is just lunch and has no evolutionary advantage. The actual evolutionary biologists make those people look like kids by comparison. And it's like, so that I had a lot of fun getting into evolutionary science and learning about it, and it was a tremendously fascinating subject.
Well, I guess especially with your interest in physics, and I guess having that scientific background as well, I can imagine that it would have been fairly eye-opening for you.
Yeah.
So I guess you've obviously got to a point where you've realised that it's time to walk away. Now, you did mention that your deconversion happened over a number of years, which I guess is a fairly common thing. I don't think there's a light bulb and walk away for a lot of us. But at what point did you make the decision to walk away from church? And I guess, and what reaction did you get from that?
Yeah. So I guess because it happened so gradually and slowly, the reaction wasn't very big. It was kind of gradual. As I was losing my faith, I had still been playing in the praise band at church and often leading the music. And, at some point I felt like I kind of need to step down from this. So I stepped down from that, and that was no big deal. And then just gradually went to church less and less, and then finally just stopped going. So yeah, as you say, there was no light bulb moment. There were a lot of relationships I had that were based purely on mutual love for the gospel and for Christianity. And so, once I gave that up, it was like that relationship's kind of gone. And then part of it also, I felt a little bit embarrassed or awkward to try to maintain relationships with some people for whom this was, like central to their lives. And I had basically said, like, I completely reject it, and I just don't believe that it's true anymore. And I felt really awkward being around people that I loved that were just completely dedicated to something that now just didn't make sense to me anymore. And I felt like I can't talk about my experience and my belief or lack of belief in these things now, because I know that that's kind of that would be painful for them too. And so I did kind of just kind of drift away and lost a lot of ties there. Although I also had some very close friends that it turned out our relationship was based on other things besides the gospel, and we're still in touch and we're still good friends today. And I'm very thankful for that.
It's nice when you can still maintain some of those friendships, and that you find that they transcend beyond, I guess, a common religious belief. It's although I guess, and there was something I think that we were talking about on Twitter actually. There is that tribalism aspect. I think people do tend to get very tribal. Whether it be with religion, politics, sporting teams. I think it's certainly it's a biological part of our makeup. Something that evolution has probably given us a bit of a hangover from the caveman days, so to speak. Yeah. So obviously, as you've walked away, you've gotten to the point where you've decided to speak out, and where you've written a book. How does that process happen?
I went from wanting to keep it secret and wanting not to make any waves. And so I actually wrote the book and put it up on Amazon initially and didn't tell anyone. A few members in my immediate family knew about it. And so the book itself was a purely personal endeavor, simply to make a record of my experiences and my transition, my deconversion, and everything that I dealt with there. And it was actually, maybe a full year, or probably a full year after I wrote the book and published it and put it out there, that I finally started feeling comfortable telling people, and actually met with some of my friends in the church and just opened up and said, I mean, you obviously know that I don't go to church anymore, but I've written this book about my experience, and it is something that I want to share with you. And so it took me a full year to be able to share that with people in my life and say, like, here's this account of why I no longer believe in these things that I used to believe so strongly in.
Now, I guess one thing in the US, and something I hear is a common thing when people walk away, it can be difficult in the US because it is such a, especially in certain parts, it is very evangelical, and, you do tend to get shunned. How was that experience for you? Did you find that was a big difference as part of your walking away, especially having written the book?
I was pretty lucky in that respect. I think a lot of those people tend to be in smaller communities, and everybody in their family is very hardcore evangelical, and it's a family emergency when someone announces that they've signed up to go to hell. And because that's what I viewed it as. I remember when actually my very first experience going to China, we went into this university campus. And as we were leaving one of the dormitories, there was this bulletin board that had photos of Chinese college students there, and some writing under it that I didn't understand. And I pointed to them and I asked my guide, one of the students who was guiding me around, "What's that? Who are those students?" And he said, "Oh, those are people who've just been accepted into the Communist Party." And my understanding of the Communist Party is like when you sign up for the Communist Party, you sign something saying, "I am an atheist." And to me, that was equivalent to like signing a paper to say, I'm going to hell, signing up to go to hell. And, when you become an atheist, to a lot of really hardcore evangelicals, that's essentially what you're doing, and they just can't comprehend it. And if they love you and they care about you, then they're going to devote all their resources to bringing you back into the fold and preventing you from going to hell and getting you back into heaven. And that ends up kind of tearing families apart, especially if the person's like, I wanted to believe this stuff. I really, really wanted to believe it. It's not that I don't want to believe. It's just that, after going through these experiences and thinking about these things and doing all this reading and looking at the world, I can't anymore. It's not a choice. But my family was pretty open-minded. I mean, the effect it had on me was more about my personal loss, because what I lost more than anything else was my sense of purpose. And that was when I became a Christian, the biggest benefit was just, it gave me this tremendous sense of purpose that just filled me with joy all the time. And when I slowly began to realize that purpose, basically wasn't real, that was a huge loss to me. And that's what took me several years to sort of reconstruct my own purpose.
And I guess, did you look at other faiths and other religions, or was it just pretty much a leaving Christianity and pretty much directly into atheism, or even via agnosticism?
Yeah, most of the arguments that I ended up formulating against Christianity, I felt were pretty general and would apply to pretty much any religion. Any specific religion that has any specific text with specific gods with specific traits. And so basically there were no religions on the menu that I would have been interested in or thought seemed plausible. And, the only thing that might seem plausible is that, there might be some force above and beyond the physical world that we're in. But if that's all you're saying, then it doesn't do much for you, especially if it hasn't revealed itself to us in any specific way.
Yeah. If there's something out there, it's very mysterious, that's for sure. Now, we might, we'll start to wrap it up there, because we're on a bit of a limited time constraint. Where to from here? What's next in your story?
Well, I guess I'll talk a little bit about tribalism then, because that's kind of what's been on my mind. But so a couple of things. One, I guess I'll mention how I did reformulate my purpose, and it took me a long time to come to this point where I've always been an artist, a writer, and a musician, and I love all kinds of creative endeavors. And that was one of the things that I was able to sort of land on when I had lost that sense of purpose. And so I do very strongly believe now that it's actually it's more beautiful to have the freedom to create your own purpose than to have one externally imposed on you by God. And so I've been enjoying that process, and just pursuing all kinds of creative endeavors. But also, why write a book like this? My book is, I think it's different from typical other atheist books, because if you look at the ones by the new atheists, say Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and Daniel Dennett, and whatever, those are typically written by outsiders and people who were not in the faith. And to believers, to Christians, that comes across as, okay, well, they're looking down on us, they're belittling us, and they never experienced it. They weren't inside the faith, so they don't know what it's like. And so my account is kind of from the inside, saying like, this is what I believed, and I still, part of me still wishes it were true. I wanted to believe in heaven, desperately wanted to, and tried to hold on to it so much. And
it's better than the alternative if it's true, isn't it?
Right. So, but then so my book is kind of less strident, as the new atheists are always accused of being strident, and more of just a personal account. And also, if you compare it to some of the other books written by people who left the church, insider accounts, a lot of them come away, or you get the impression that there's just a lot of anger and bitterness there, right? And I hope that mine doesn't come across that way, because again, I am very grateful for a lot of the experiences that I had in the church, a lot of the skills that I developed, leadership skills, and even a lot of the values that I gained from studying the Bible and from consistently and continually striving to be a better person. Like just that habit of continual self-examination and trying to be more filled with love and joy and all those things, that I am very glad that I still carry that with me. So my account is very sympathetic towards religion, but at the same time, I came to the conclusion that these beliefs that I had been basing my entire life on were simply not true. And so I assume most people want to believe something that's true and don't want to believe something that's false. And so because of that, it's still important to me to share that thought process with people who still believe and say, look, after much examination, I came to the conclusion that this is not true. And so I feel like people who believe in heaven and hell and are spending their whole life and focusing all their energy on building up treasure for themselves in heaven, when it's not real, that there's a little bit of tragedy in there. And, depending on how much they focus on that, because my conclusion now is that this life and this world is all we have. And, as a former believer, like that was sort of a devastating thing to start to believe, because I had thought, like, there's a heaven, there's an eternity, and that is what gives everything value. And so, now I feel that this is all we have, and that makes it so much more precious than it was otherwise. And as a believer, we would often argue that. We would say, like, think about your lifespan on an eternal timeline. And as you zoom out, as you take the limit, as your distance from the timeline goes to infinity, that your lifespan shrinks to an insignificant point. And all that matters is eternity, right? And this kind of flips that on the head. It's like, that's all there is, and that's all you get. And so you need to do with it, don't
waste your time.
Don't waste your time with that. And I feel like there are a lot of people who are in this game of life, and they have been slipped a fake set of rules, and they're playing the wrong game, and they don't know it. And so I kind of want to say,
good analogy, actually. I think that's a very good analogy.
Thank you. And so I just kind of want to say, like, stop playing with the fake set of rules, because there's so much that needs to be done in this life to meet needs that exist now, to reduce suffering among our fellow humans now and in future generations. And this is where I get into tribalism. Or I don't get into tribalism, but I get into my diatribe against tribalism, and I have a sermon to preach on this.
Okay.
And that is, I look at the world right now, and I look at how the conflict that we've got right now, and when I say we, I mean all of humanity, we have some enormous problems that we face together. And some of those problems are on the level of existential threats, and some of them are on the level of things that if we don't solve them, there's going to be much more suffering in the near future and for our children and grandchildren than there has to be. And most of these problems, I believe, are solvable. If we work together, it is possible to find solutions to them. But right now, we're too busy fighting against each other. In America, it's Democrats versus Republicans, and we're so wrapped up in scoring points against the other side that we've lost sight of the higher game. We're playing a really low-level game here, and we're so focused on it that we've forgotten that there's a much more important game going on there. And I'm trying to find a metaphor for this that will stick. And here's my metaphor is that
Mhm.
we are in a chess game against the devil. We're in the middle of a chess game against the devil. And the devil is on the other side of the board, moving the pieces slowly and steadily, strengthening his position against us. And we are gathered around 9 squares in the back corner on our side of the chessboard, playing a game of tic-tac-toe against each other on the chessboard. And we're so focused. We have gotten, like, maybe in the past, we were aware that there was a chess game going on and we're trying to play that, and the tic-tac-toe thing was on the side. But now, tribalistically, we're in our factions. We're so focused on beating and annihilating and destroying our opponent in the tic-tac-toe game. We want to draw blood from that opponent at all costs, that we've forgotten we're on a chessboard. We've forgotten that the devil is over there just a few moves away from checkmating us. And we're playing the wrong game. And so that's something that I think everybody right now, and I think this is happening.
You're good with these analogies. I'm just going to say that you do analogies very well.
Well, thank you.
Better parables than Jesus, even.
So my message is everybody right now needs to sort of examine the game that they're playing, examine the game that you're playing, examine your motives and the things that you're trying to do and the points that you're trying to score, and ask yourself, are you playing a big game, that a higher game that has significance, or are you caught in a little petty game like the tic-tac-toe on the corner of the board? Because I think a lot of us are trapped in a game and we don't even know it. And it's just a game where, if you look, you can see it most easily on Twitter, where people are just trying to score points against the other side. And there's sort of two components there. You just want to own the other side, and the other component is you want to gain prestige in the eyes of the people who are on your team. And all of that is completely counterproductive in the context of the higher game that we need to be working together and focusing on. And so I think right now, anything that's focused on just scoring points against the other side and gaining prestige for your team is destructive. Anything that's not focused on healing and bridging divides is destructive. And right now, especially, in the United States, we've got leaders who they spend all their time tweeting about how the other half of the country is trying to destroy us. And we are being destroyed literally by false beliefs about other Americans. And we've got narratives that are being crafted in the media where people on one side, they will take the most extreme example of a person on the other side. So for example, take a right-leaning news outlet or a right-wing news outlet, a personality like Sean Hannity or Fox News or something. They'll take some far left extremist and paint a picture of that person and say everyone on the left is like that and all Democrats are like that, and they are trying to destroy our country, and this is an existential threat and we need to stand up and fight against them. And in the meantime, the same thing is happening in the other direction. And if I were tasked with the mission of destroying America, I couldn't find a better way to do it myself than to have...
You would just stand back. It's doing it to itself, isn't it?
Exactly. Then you divide them into two groups and you convince each group that the other one is completely made up of extremists who are bent on destroying the country, and we have to do everything in our power to stop that. And you're right. You just stand back and watch that happen.
Because it's if you listen to the media narratives, or even probably the Twitter narrative is the more obvious one. You'd believe that essentially on one side you've got a bunch of communist looters and rioters who are trying to burn the country down, and on the other side you've got a bunch of neo-Nazi nationalists who want to enslave and imprison and kill everyone who doesn't look like them. And the reality is neither of those narratives are true.
Right. Certainly neither one reflects the majority of Americans. And what I see right now is, you've got, I don't know what the percentages are, but let's say you've got 5% on one end of the spectrum that's the kind of extremist that we just talked about, and a 5% on the other end. And the false narrative that we're getting right now is that that 5% at the one end represents half the country, and that the 5% at the other end represents the other half of the country. And I'm worried that we're going to be going back and forth between candidates for leadership who only represent that 5%. And what we need is someone who represents the 90% who are, reasonable people.
And it is a problem that you've got. I mean, as an outsider looking in, look, regardless of what side of politics people sit on, you don't have good candidates or good politicians necessarily in positions of power on either side. It seems to be the media choices, or the outcomes seem to be decided before they even begin. It was Joe Biden was always going to be the nominee, and I secretly think the media wants to keep Donald Trump in because he's great for clickbait. He's the ultimate clickbait president.
Sometimes I wonder if the far left doesn't want Donald Trump to stay in because they're kind of addicted to their outrage, and there's something about having a person on whom you can focus all of your anger that is somehow sort of cathartic and beneficial to the narrative that some people want. Of course, I consider myself to be on the left, and I think Donald Trump is abhorrent, and I hope that we will vote him out of office as soon as possible. But I do look around on my side of the political aisle, and I see people who are doing things that seem calculated to give Trump more ammunition and give him greater strength going into the election. And I'm thinking, come on, what are you doing?
I'm absolutely convinced that they are trying to keep Donald Trump in power, because it's, look, no offense to Joe Biden, but a Joe Biden doing something isn't going to be as sexy to click on for the advertising money for those, it's I remember it's when we had a left-wing government here in Australia, and the right-wing media, we reckon they loved it because it gave them something to complain about and rally against, and got people angry and listening, and I think it's the same thing with Trump. I think it's I mean, you hear some of the narratives, and look, Trump does some pretty stupid things, and I sit on the right. Trump does some really stupid things. But some of the stories that come out, I just kind of scratch my head and go, it's obvious bullshit, but people are just, it's like it's gospel, because it's the narrative that they want to hear. It's, it's the orange man's bad and we must believe anything. And I think a great example is the story that came out in the Atlantic this week, that, he apparently said that, the troops were losers and things like that. It turns out the whole thing was bullshit. It was never said.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that. Yeah. Okay.
No. It's so what it was 4 unnamed sources, but what they did was they actually interviewed John Bolton, who was in this particular meeting that it would have been said. And John Bolton, as you know, just put out a book about how incompetent and how much he disdain he has for Trump. They interviewed him and he said, no, he said that was never said. That never happened. The reason he didn't go on the trip was because he was advised not to, because of weather in a helicopter. It wasn't safe. So it's sort of come out that it might have been a made-up story, but hey, guess what? Here I am on the other side of the country. Look at that one. Look at that one. But it's but it's a classic example of a story was put out with unnamed sources that wasn't fact-checked, but people will believe it. And the same thing happens. I mean, you hear all the stories about Joe Biden supposedly, his son's a crook, and he's got cognitive issues, and all these other stories. As soon as they come out, the other side, I guess that the right will jump all over it, and it must be true because it's it's Biden's bad. He's the worst thing ever, and it's quite it's quite an interesting sort of narrative, and I think the tribalism, though, it's interesting because I think it's something that, while yes, we would like to avoid, or I think it should be avoided, I don't necessarily think it's something that we can avoid, because I think it's just part of our genetic makeup. It goes back to when we were in literally the tribes, and that's how we, I guess that's how we evolved. So I think we're always going to have that little bit of tribalism, whether we like it or not, at least in the immediate future.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I also think that it's one of those things like subconscious cognitive bias, where once you become aware of it, you can't excise it from your brain, right? It is going to be there, but once you become aware of it, you can sort of watch for it and, use the more rational part of your brain to avoid some of its effects, right?
You can be a little bit more aware of it. I mean, I know I've caught myself at times sort of, I'll see something that'll come out for my sports team, or it's my side of politics, or in favor of atheism, and automatically I guess there's that part of my brain that leans towards, I guess, the narrative I want to hear, and yes, I guess I'm fortunate that I can sort of step back and go, okay, well, hang on, am I being tribal? Am I being biased? And look, that's not to say, because I know that I'm biased with a lot of things. I know that I still do get tribal, and I think it's something that we all do, possibly whether we like it or not. And I don't always like it, but I acknowledge it.
Yeah, definitely. But I think that habit that you just mentioned, you have the habit of stepping back and saying, wait, am I just doing that because it's tribal or not? A lot of people don't even have that habit and don't even have the level of awareness to step back and even question that. And another thing you mentioned that I think is really important right now is a lot of people deep down, whether they realize it or not, don't even really care what is true. And when they're scrolling through things on Twitter and they see an account of a shooting that happened on the street between different groups of protesters, and they see various perspectives on it and various videos that have been edited in different ways, or I think a lot of people, given the choice between clicking on a video that will actually show everything that happened from beginning to end without anything being cut out or edited or whatever, or one that shows their preferred narrative, they're going to click on the one that was posted by someone who was on their team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because and so there's almost maybe most of the time it's subconscious, but sort of like a deliberate disregard for truth, and instead just embracing the narrative that you want to be true, which is really destructive and polarizing right now, because it's kind of a self magnifying feedback loop, where the more you do that, then the more extreme the views get and the more polarized the teams get, and then it just gets worse.
Now we have cracked over the 1 hour mark, so I might wrap it up. Now. I do need my beauty sleep, despite what everyone thinks. I desperately need my beauty sleep. It's hard to look this bad all the time.
You've clearly been getting plenty of beauty sleep.
Oh, you're too kind, but see, that's I can tell when people are lying, but that's okay. All right, so if people do want to find you or find your book, where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Henry Rambow, and Rambow is spelled with a W at the end. And I have a website that's just www.henryrambow.com, and so it's Henry, and then Rambow is Rambow. And I've got that book, Confessions of a Rogue Missionary, and a couple other things and some essays there. And you can also just get in touch with me on Twitter. And lately I've been tweeting about basically three things: atheism, politics, of course, because it's unavoidable right now in the US, and tribalism. That's kind of my new hobby horse, is to try to get people to bridge their divides and overcome their differences, so that we can work together and play a higher game to solve the problems that
sounds like my Twitter feed. Add a little bit of drama in there, and I think you've got my Twitter feed. But no, well, that's good. Well, all the links will be they'll be below. They're not there yet, but when it's all finished doing its thing on YouTube, it all will go in. So and anyone who does want any of the links, shoot me a message on Twitter and I can get those to you. Apart from that, we've got Friday Night Six Pack will be on this Friday night. We're talking about Genesis and creation this week, so it should be interesting. So we'll look at the claims of young Earth creationism, old Earth creationism, all while having a couple of drinks. And as with any Friday Night Six Pack, it could go in any direction. We do have, so I've actually got some really cool podcasts lined up over the next couple of weeks. So look out for some announcements on those. Of course, I've got Over and Under that I'm doing with Steve McRae. That's on, well, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon for me on Thursday, which I think is Wednesday evening for those of you in the States, but keep an eye on that. But look, apart from that, everyone, wherever you are, have a good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Henry, thank you very much for joining me. And we've got to do this again. I think there's a lot we could talk about. I think we could do a couple of hours on tribalism if we wanted to.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Yeah.
That's the fun one. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, everyone in the chat. Thanks, everyone who's sort of for the questions and who has been here since, the start or whenever. And to everyone listening in the future, hope you're having a wonderful day. Catch you all later.